The lesson for today can be found on page 412 of your textbook. The title is To Multiply Decimals. So our objective for today is to have two decimal numbers as our factors. So let's go ahead and try one example. 0.9 multiplied by 0.3. Notice that both of our factors are decimals, so how can we find the product? Let's try it first. The way that we have learned before, let's change this into a fraction. 9/10 becomes 9/10, or 9 over 10. 3/10 becomes 3 over 10. There is nothing to cross cancel, so we're going to go ahead and multiply across. 9 times 3 is 27. 10 times 10 is 100, so that becomes our denominator. In looking at this answer, we want to see how can we put this into words. It is 27 hundredths. How can we then write this as a decimal number? It becomes 27 hundredths. Notice that this last place value is the hundredths place value. Ooh. Great. Is there another way to do it? There certainly is. So let's go ahead and give that a try. The same problem, 0.9, and we're going to multiply that by 0.3. Remember when we have been learning that the very first step is to multiply regularly. So 3 times 9 is 27. Up goes a 2. 3 then times 0 plus 2 is 2. Then I can go ahead and do the 0 times 9. I put a plus to hold my place, and the 0/10 becomes a 0 and a 0. And then I can go ahead and add 7 to 0. Now remember step number 2? Step number 2 asked, how many numbers are there after the decimal point? Let's go back to our problem. The first factor, we find a decimal point, and we find that there's only one space. So we go ahead and we write that down. Then we look at our next factor, and we see that there is also one space after the decimal point. When we comes down to our answer then, we will add up how many spaces there are, and we'll see that we will need to have 2 spaces after the decimal point. Right over here. The answer then becomes 0 and 27 hundredths, or 0.27. This is a continuation of what we've learned before. Asking the question on step number 2 is very important. And when it comes down to the answer, we want to know however many spaces there are after the decimal point. In a whole problem, that's how many there will be in the answer. So let's go ahead and try a different problem. In this case, we're going to multiply 9/10 times 71 hundredths. The very first step is to multiply regularly. 9 times 1 is 9. 9 times 7 is 63. 9 times 0 is 0 plus 6. Bring the 6 down. Do I need to multiply the 0 times 1 times 7 times 0? No, I don't. So in this example, I won't. Now I'm going to move on then to step number 2. I find how many spaces there are after the decimal point. Here I have 1, and here I have 2. In this factor, I have 2. In the next factor then, I have only 1 space. Remember that for our answer, I need to combine, I need to add these spaces. So my answer will be 3 down here. Do you see why it's useful to write it off on the side? Now, the answer should have 3 spaces after the decimal point. So 1, 2, and here's my third. And this is where I draw my decimal point. So notice that there are no digits here. I can just fill it up with a 0 and write it out afterwards. So the answer then is 0.639. Let's try one final example. In this problem, I'm going to multiply 3.2 times 1.43. I want you to notice that it is important to line up the numbers so that your multiplication will come out correctly. However, notice that the decimal points are not lined up. It is not important for the decimal points to line up in a multiplication problem only. Let's go ahead and do step number 1. Let's multiply 2 times 3, 6. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 1 is 2. Then I'm going to calculate the tens place value. So I'm going to put a plus here to hold my space. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12, and up goes a 1. 3 times 1 is 1 plus 1. Let's try that again. 3 times 1 is 3 plus 1 is 4. Okay, just checking to see if you are awake. Now we can go ahead and add them up. 6 plus nothing is 6. 8 plus 9 is 17. Up goes a 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. Plus 2 is 5. Okay, and then we have the 4. Now, step number 2 says, I should clarify that step number 2 doesn't really say, it's more like asks, right? How many spaces are there after the decimal point? Let's go back to our factors. Okay, in this case, after the decimal point, we find 1, 2 spaces. So go ahead and write the 2. And in the next factor, we find that there's only 1 space after the decimal point. So I'm going to go ahead and add these up. My answer then should have 1, 2, 3 spaces after the decimal point. So that's where my decimal point goes. The answer then to 3.2 times 1.43 is 4.576. Please be very careful in this one final step. Decide where the decimal point will be after you do the multiplication correctly. And it's a great idea to have these numbers written on the side. To go ahead and put the plus sign and write it on the next to the answer, so that way you'll know and you can check yourself to see where to place your decimal point and how many spaces there will be after it. Before we go, I do want to point out one thing. What is the value of the digit 5 in the number 3.456? That's right, the answer is 500ths. Now, what about in the number 34.56? That's right. Just by moving the decimal point 1 space, the value of the digit 5 changed to 5/10. Now, let's look at the number What is the value of the digit 5 in 345.6? That's right, the answer is 5 ones. Now, how much greater is the number 34.56 than 3.456? The answer would be it's 10 times greater. And the number 345.6 is then 10 times greater than 34.56. This little exercise highlights the difference it makes when you place the decimal point. So be sure to count the spaces correctly and put your decimal point, the final answer, in the correct place. Thank you. So today you have learned how to multiply a decimal by another decimal number, and in the next lesson you'll learn that it's sometimes necessary to add zeros in the products of decimal factors. So stay tuned.